Welcome. This is Adrian Sinclair with Apodcast with Interesting People. And today my guest is Nancy Krebs. Nancy is a very experienced actor and singer and songwriter, musician, recording artist. I can go on and on and on. But she's also an instructor and a vocal coach. And that's the tangent that we're going to start off with today, because the topic is going to be, what can we do with our voice, with our vocal strengths, and what can we do to be better announcers, better at presentation and things like that. So that's just one of the topics that we're going to talk about. And I'm so glad to have Nancy over here on the show. Thank you for being with us. And it's been a while since I've seen you in person. Just for the audience's, I guess, just a little disclaimer over here. Nancy used to be my vocal coach, and she showed me the ropes, just the basics, because I was ad hoc student, I'd say, more than anything else. I came in with some things that I wanted to work on, and Nancy was good enough to take me in and show me some of the things. So welcome to the show, Nancy.
Well, thank you very much, Adrian. It's great to be with you after a few years.
I'm glad that you're doing well. And I'm so excited to have you on the show, because you have your bio, your experience that you have from acting, from singing, from coaching people is just so extensive that as I'm building out this show and talking to people, I always think about what else can be done better, what else can be done differently to be more clearer, to be, just be more relaxed about, doing these conversations. And when someone like you with so many years of experience on stage and acting, you just popped into my head, and I said to myself, I need to talk to Nancy, reconnect, and see what's going on in your world, and tease out some of the pro tips from you for other podcasters and YouTubers and actors, voice actors, and so on, to kind of carry some of the stuff that you do. And so my question for you is, can you tell me a little bit about the Leske Method that you are a master teacher of? How does that differ than your typical coaching, voice acting or voice coaching?
Arthur Leske, first of all, was 100 years old when he passed away in 2011. And he was still teaching in Croatia 2 weeks before he passed away. We all want to be him when we grow up, which is why we never seem to age when we're employing his work. The work that Arthur taught and that we continue to teach is based on sensation. In other words, if you can learn to feel the sensation of an associated sound, for instance, a consonant or a vowel, you're never going to forget what that feels like, rather than trying to listen for something on the outside. So instead, we're sensing what's taking place on the inside. We're tapping into that sensation so we can reproduce it. So this work is very holistic. It's he called it kinesensic. It's called
what does that
kinesensic. Well, kine meaning movement or motion, essence from the essence or the basic nature or study of, sens for sensation or inner spirit, and sick for familiar occurrences. So we're really building our training on things that we're already familiar with, that we already know how to do, and then we're taking it into unfamiliar territory. So it's a constant cumulative building of skills based on something that you felt. Like if I were to ask you, for instance, to hum on an M, just on one note, and I'd ask you a series of questions like, what does that feel like? What are you feeling? Can you feel the vibration? Where is that vibration? Where is it strongest? All right, hold on to that sensation and go ahead and change the pitch. After you change the pitch, now let's put it in words. So dim, symptom, embalm. So once we learn to feel that sensation, then we can add more instruments, we call them instruments, consonant instruments, into to the mix. And pretty soon you have a very clear, articulate voice. Consonants are the easiest to feel. And then we move into vowels, and we move into expressiveness, and we move into what we call body energies as well as vocal energies. So it really encompasses the entire body as well as the voice. Because Arthur used to say, you can't train the voice until you train the body as well. So because the voice, where does it live? It lives inside the body. So it differs from other vocal pedagogies in that it is solely predicated upon let's feel what's taking place and learn from the feeling. So that's what Leske Kinesthesia is in about a minute and a half, I think. I don't have my elevator down pat yet.
And this is not the show for the elevator speeches, just a conversation in which we just exchange these ideas and tips and tricks. And I remember in your studio when we were practicing pronunciation, some of the things that, how you, just like you demonstrated right now, whether it's V or M, that resonance, where is that voice coming from? Mm-hmm. In your experience, and I know it's been years that you've been coaching people, so you've probably seen different types of issues that people are dealing with their vocal abilities. Mm-hmm. What do you see now as one of the biggest things that people are struggling when you watch someone either on TV or maybe even on YouTube? If you see someone, or maybe even just some kind of recording of something, and you see someone on a by the podium or on a stage, and they're saying something, and you're like, they could do this or that. What are some of the things that you see out there?
It depends on the circumstances, to be honest. If I hear somebody talking and I'm not seeing them, like for instance, a voiceover artist, I'm going to have different opinions about what that individual might work on in order to improve his or her voice. If I see somebody on stage, that's another issue. If I hear somebody in a movie or on television, that's a different set of circumstances. So it's really determined by circumstances. But let's just say a pandemic that I've noticed in the last 30 years. I've been teaching since 1994 in my studio, a VoiceWorks studio, privately. But I've also been teaching at the School for the Arts, which is a high school for the performing and visual arts, since 1981. So my experience with voice training goes all the way back to 1981. But what I've noticed since 1980s to now is that most people speak and allow their voices to be trapped in the back of their throats. So I'll give you a demonstration. For instance, they have something that I call onset, which is like, I don't know what I mean. I'm not sure. That sort of scratch. Or you'll hear that scratch, what we call vocal fry or vocal retreat, taking place as they come to the end of a sentence or a phrase. For instance, once upon a time, there was a little girl. So this little, this sort of retreat into the back of the throat is something that's taking place across the board now. Especially with people, and I'm not ageist by any means, but I have noticed that people that are 40 and above don't have it as much as people 40 and below. Matter of fact, at the School for the Arts, I just retired from the School for the Arts after 39 years. I would do a lot of work with them initially on keeping their voices forward. So the first thing I would say to somebody that I would hear doing that, meaning vocally retreating, is to build their awareness that it's taking place, because most people are not even aware that their voices are retreating. Right. And they come to me and they wonder why their voices aren't being heard, or why they don't have any confidence in their voice, or they feel like their voice is holding them back, especially people that are presenters. And so we have to do a little problem solving. What is it that you feel is taking place? What happens when you talk? Do people, you say people don't listen. Well, why do you think that? So we go through a series of questions and answers so I can determine the why behind this. And then I can help with the how. How can I help you? Because it's all about their goals. And I would say that by and large, That's what's really taking place. The voice being retreating into the throat is something that I really want to approach as quickly as I possibly can. Because I notice in your voice, for instance, you have a very nice, strong voice now. Strong from the beginning, strong all the way through the ends. So it's really wonderful. That sort of resonance in your voice is really nice to hear. So I predict a shining future for you in podcasting.
Well, you heard it here, folks. One day someone's going to watch this. Yes, it happened, and Nancy definitely had her, input and influence in it for sure. One of the things that I'm struggling with, as I sometimes watch these podcasts after I record them, we typically over here try to record it in one shot, unless there's some kind of a technical issue or something, or my daughter walks on in and we have to cut because she wants attention. Mm-hmm. We typically just shoot it in one sitting, and then we just upload it without any cutting, editing, just because it just takes so much time to do that. And we want to be just genuine, and we want this to be a real conversation. One of the things that I've noticed about myself, and I wonder if you have any tips on that, is the which those little vocal commas that we have. Sometimes I even put a piece of paper over here on the wall in the studio. No no, to try to visually remind myself that I shouldn't do that. But it is almost like an invisible thing, because we do it automatically, just like those other things that you mentioned, like the vocal fry. People just don't even hear it. So someone has to bring it to their attention. But even if they do know it, how do they remind themselves of it to not do that, to just move on and not use those stop gaps?
My answer to that is, I notice that I don't do a single and I'm not quite sure why that is true. I'm wondering why that is. Maybe it's because as soon as you become aware that you are using these time buyers, we call them time buyers, all right? The little stop gaps of like, or so. The so is very prominent now, right? So right. It's a time buyer. It's just buying me time so I can think. If you draw somebody's attention to it, this is a habit, all right? This is an habitual pattern that you've gotten used to using to kind of help you think. If somebody brings it to your attention, it can no longer function as a habit, because then you're aware of it and you'll become hyper aware of it, which is a good thing. Because if you can become hyper aware of it, you're going to begin to recognize in the moment when it's taking place. And then you'll make a concerted effort, if I can use that word, effort. We don't like using that word effort because it involves work. But if I can use it just for a moment to illustrate, to use that moment of recognition to stop you from doing that. It's going to mean there's a millisecond of pause. Right. But I think it's better to have just that pause as you're thinking to fill that moment rather than the It's just getting used to recognizing it in the moment. And then you'll just have to play with it. You're going to have to play with it, rehearse with it, meaning not doing it anymore, using the slight pause as your new time buyer, and eventually you won't need it at all. Knowing your material is also another good way not to have any right? I always recommend people that are doing presentations. Let's say, for instance, a presentation in front of a live audience. I always say to them, why don't you just memorize the first paragraph? That's all you need. Memorize the first paragraph, your opener, what you're going to say. For instance, you have a spiel that you say at the beginning as you're talking about your first guest, and you don't really need to say anything extemporaneously. What you do instead is you just read that first paragraph about the bio, and then you open up the conversation. That's the same thing that should happen when someone is doing a live presentation. If you memorize that first paragraph, your opener, hello, everyone, and welcome to such and such. My name is so-and-so, and this is what we're going to do today, blah, blah, blah. It automatically puts everybody in the audience at ease because they recognize that you know what you're talking about. There are no ums, there's no changing, there's no stopping. And then after that first paragraph, everybody opens up. Everybody stops doing this, and they start putting their arms down, and they start listening intently because they are put at ease because you know what you're talking about, and they trust you now.
Right.
It works every time.
That is so true. And I am a little bit guilty of doing it more of a extemporaneously initially, and then with my opening. But then I realized, well, what is the information that I want to transmit? What is it that I want to tell? And so I kind of narrowed it down to key elements. But I still am. See. There it is.
There it is.
And I'm still sometimes I don't know. It doesn't feel as polished yet. So I definitely need to continue working on it. However, the key is just rehearsals and continuing on. Sometimes we psych ourselves out by. I'm super sensitive about pronunciation of my guests. I'm super sensitive about proper pronunciation of my guests' last names, and sometimes I just psych myself out of that in by being so stressed about it that I screw up.
Sure. Well, what you're looking for, if I can interject, is what you're looking for, and what anyone who is a presenter, a performer, anyone in the public eye is looking for, is something that I call rehearsed spontaneity. The better you know the material, the more it can seem like you really are just talking off the top of your head. That's really what you want. You want that relaxation. You want to put people at ease. You don't want it to seem that formal. Because that's not the way we share information anymore, through the formality of, say, the lecture demonstration. That isn't the way people operate anymore, even in the live situation of you as a presenter and you in front of 150 people that have been invited to this event. So you really want it to be as rehearsed as possible, yet look like it's spontaneous.
And that is the crux of the matter, how to do that. Obviously rehearsing, so you are familiar with the topic, you're familiar with what you want to say, but at the same time, having the ability of tying the conversation together and questions, so lead on to following questions, so that the conversation flows. And I had a good opportunity to talk to Dean Nelson, who is a professional journalist for 40 years. And we had a wonderful podcast with him. I read his book about how to interview people and how to talk to people, how to ask good questions. And it's unbelievable how couple of small little tactics that you learn can save your bacon numerous times and make the conversation flow in such a way that you are not stressing out, because we all always stress out about, oh my goodness, what if I'm going to run out of what to talk about? And there's going to be this pregnant pause, and then what? It's just going to be awkward. And you know what? Sometimes, and I came to the point in which even a pause doesn't really bother me anymore. In fact, I'd rather take a pause than an and it's a learned habitual response. It's a learned thing to do, and it just comes with practice, just like any other craft. But I wanted to
pause,
go ahead.
Let me just interject. The pause that you think seems to last forever, like you could drive a truck through it, isn't really as long as you think it is to the person that's listening. It actually gives the audience a chance to catch up with you. Right.
No, that's true. And it seems that we've been so conditioned by, I don't know, what is it? Maybe it's just the way everything is served information-wise right now, and this rapid spitfire, and people are just not okay with pauses. Everything has to just stream continuously without pauses, because a pause means maybe you're unprepared and it has some kind of bad connotation. But sometimes having a pause and reflecting on something is better than having some kind of a verbal comma in there, a stopgap, like as you said. And maybe we're going to bring it back. I'm working on it for sure.
Well, it's not easy, because I've felt in recent years that I can't get what I want to say out fast enough before someone interrupts me. So we're not willing nowadays to actually listen to somebody before we respond. I think that's a sad commentary on what's taking place within conversation. Well, first of all, we don't have very many conversations anymore. I think your podcast is really unique in that it's allowing somebody to have the luxury of time to simply answer a question rather than, like you said, about the talking heads that are on television, that they're only given, a very brief period of time to kind of solve the problems of the world.
Right.
And nobody can do that. No one can do that. And so I feel oftentimes like I don't have the time. No one's going to give me the time to finish what I have to say. And that's rather sad. That means we are unwilling. We have no patience anymore. The art of listening is going by the wayside, and I'm saddened to hear it and to witness it myself.
Public speaking. Switching topics really quick. Public speaking, which is, I think, I'm not sure where it ranks right now in terms of fear and phobias that people have, but I know it was always on the top. People rather die than speak in public. What do you see nowadays? In my I guess circles, I see there's still a lot of it. People are just afraid of standing in front of other people and speaking. What do you attribute to that? What do you think are like some of the main things that are hamstringing people from being good public speakers, or just public speakers without stressing out too much?
Oh, you mean, okay, what do people fear about public speaking?
Right.
Well, second to or third, there's death, I think, divorce, and fear of speaking in public, in that order. All right, that's what people fear. Death, okay, divorce, whether that's from a job or from a spouse, and then public speaking ranks third. And I think it's because we're so vulnerable. I mean, we're so exposed when we're speaking in public. I have many actor friends who really don't even like the curtain call, because the curtain call is not the character. The curtain call is the actor. And many actors are really shy in public. As people, they're shy, and that's why they love the art of acting, because it gives them that exposure to be able to embody a person that is not necessarily themselves, and they can express themselves more freely that way. People fear public speaking because I think, one, it's very exposing. All of our thoughts and our feelings and our, dreams and desires come out on the voice. I've always felt like if the eyes are the window to the soul, the voice must be the door. Because even though we look at the world and we take in all the information through our 5 fundamental senses, when we want to share our thoughts, our emotions, our desires, our goals, our dreams, our hopes, our fears, they all come out on the voice. So people feel like when they have to actually speak, give voice to those inner feelings and inner thoughts, it's content is part of it. What am I going to say? And then there's the, how am I going to frame it? How am I going to actually form these words in a coherent fashion that's going to entice people to listen to me? I think people are innately nowadays, and maybe that's been true forever, people are fearful of being rejected. So that's why speaking in public is just so, such a trepidatious experience. My job, I see it when people come to my studio for that express reason. Some people come because they're presenters, and presenting is a public speaking event. What can they do to overcome their fear, and what can they do to create a kind of confidence that will stand them in good stead as they're embarking on this event?
And what are some of your top tips that you would give someone to compose themselves, reclaim their stance on before delivering a presentation or a speech? What are some of the things that you advise to your students?
Well, let me take you through the first lesson that I would give for somebody that would come to me as a presenter, and we'll give him the pronoun of he right now. He comes and he says, I don't feel confident when I speak. I feel like people don't listen to me, or I just feel like I'm not a very effective presenter. Because presenting skills is one of the things I teach in my studio. And presenting skills is voice, how you speak, and how you look, and how you engage, and what your content is. So you have at least four elements that have to be addressed. I always listen to the person give a little bit of the presentation first. I ask the person to come prepared to show me the first maybe 10 minutes of your presentation. And that way I'm listening and I'm taking notes. And all I can do for a person who comes to me for the first time and wants something to work on is give that individual 3 things to work on. Because if you give them 4, they'll forget them.
Right.
But if you give somebody 3, ideas of improvement, 3 areas of improvement, he or she can go home and start working on that. So the first one I'm going to say is engage with your audience. That means make eye contact. It means look at your audience. Don't bury your face in your notes, because people come not just to hear you read a speech, they come to engage with you. So the first thing I say is, let's say I've been watching somebody give his 10-minute snippet of his presentation, and he's staring down at his notes the whole time, and once in a while looking up at me, looking back down, looking up. I'll say, do you know this material? And he'll say, oh yeah, I know this very well. I said, then do you really need the notes? Oh, well, I like to refer to them. I said, are you going to use a PowerPoint? He said, yeah. I said, well, won't the notes be on the PowerPoint? Yeah. I said, well, then why can't you look at the PowerPoint? Look at the PowerPoint and look at the audience, so that you are giving them what we call secondary focus.
Right.
If the actor, let's say in this case, the actor is looking at the PowerPoint, then the audience is also going to look at what the presenter is looking at. So that way you've actually killed 2 birds with 1 stone. You're reading your notes, but they're interactable for everyone to see. So that's the first thing I want them to remember, is to engage with your audience, whether that's with visual eye contact, whether that's with gesture, whether that's with open, sort of stance, so that people feel like you're not all closed off. The second thing I'm going to say is, will you please be articulate? Let's find a way to make you a little more articulate, especially if they're talking too fast or slurring their words together. I'll say, let's address that. And the third thing will be to finish the ends of every phrase, meaning to carry the energy through the end of the sentence rather than to the end of the sentence, which is going to help them become more aware of this vocal fry that seems to be, as I said before, a pandemic among many people. And it's not just the United States of America either. It's happening all over the world. The same kind of vocal fry, vocal retreat, so that at the end of the phrase, it dies out. And so as a result, people don't hear the end. Right. You don't carry them through the entire thought. So I would like to, impress on people those 3 things first. If we can address those 3 things in the time that we have together, their presentation is going to be so much more effective. And they're going to feel so much better about what they're doing, that their confidence is going to be raised. Their confidence is going to be much more enhanced, and they're going to feel successful. And I think that's really why people come to my studio, is to start to feel successful in ways that perhaps they hadn't before. Does that make sense?
It does. And I want to just ask you, who can we blame for this vocal fry? Where did that come from?
Well, I have my theories. But I think, and I don't want to name a name, okay? I don't want to say this person did it to us. But I think there was a time period in the 80s when the predominant political figures, especially, started to adopt a kind of folksy, down-home sort of vocal pattern, and whether that was natural for them or whether it was something they put on, but it kind of sounded a little like this, and so everything was sort of like, kind of like this. kind of keeping it close to the vest kind of thing and trying to appeal to you in a very personal kind of way. And that's sort of like that. People thought that sounded so cool and so good that they wanted to adopt it themselves. And our young people especially started to do it. And I'm not sure that it didn't happen to them. I'm talking about teenagers and young adults because they were insecure about what they were saying and they weren't being heard. So there's a real, I think, I don't know what the word is that I'm looking for there, a kind of a modus operandi, for want of a better word, among young people to go, well, I really feel this about this. I'm not really sure I do. You know, they start strong and they sense that they're not being listened to, or that what they're saying isn't really very important, or that adults really weren't listening at all. And so they just would retreat emotionally from the thought, and the voice sort of carried that inward. And so I think it's a combination of two. That's my theory. You know, please tell me that I'm wrong. I have
well, I don't know who started it, but I just after you saying, projecting some of that, I think I have an idea who you have in mind who started some of that.
Right.
But we're not going to name names.
No, we're not naming names. But we might, many of us who are old enough to know, might remember that time in history and how effective that really was, you know, as a way of communication. Right.
What do you do when you are preparing a presentation, not only in terms of, other than the things that we already talked about, so not only getting knowing your material well, and rehearsing some of it, and rehearsing at least that opening paragraph to get the ball rolling and having that eye contact with the audience. Do you do anything else to calm yourself down? Because, you know, you can, there's a point of diminishing returns, right? When we can practice something and we might just psych ourselves out because might be a huge presentation, might be very important, a lot may be pivoting on it. And so people still are nervous. And beyond just getting, preparation, they might be actually tripping over themselves because they maybe even over prepare. What else can be done to help people, just get in a zone and be relaxed?
I have two strategies, all right? And these are two strategies that were passed on to me through my work with the kinesensic training, Leske kinesensic training. The first one is called smelling the flower. And you and I may have covered this.
Yes, we have.
I'm not sure. Did we? All right.
Yes, we have. I remember that.
Oh, there you go. Well, then let's share it with your audience. It's a very simple strategy of what we call self-absorbed behavior, which is if I were to cup my hands not in front of my face like this, but like at a 45-degree angle, and inhale the aroma of something that would really be a good smell, something like a flower, a rose, or now we use other images like Starbucks coffee, or your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your husband, your wife, your spouse's favorite cologne. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter. But just believably inhale the aroma with your eyes closed, and I'm going to do it for you. And I exhale with pleasure. And I do that several times. And each time I do that, I deepen that awareness. I deepen the experience. I go deeper into the sense of the aroma, because the sense of smell is very evocative. If I were to say to you, for instance, do you remember the smell of chocolate chip cookies or Toll House cookies baking in the oven around Christmas time?
Who doesn't?
When your grandmother was baking in the oven, or your mom? Chances are you would remember that smell. It would be triggered by just the image of remembering that. So this sense of smell is very important. But what it does is if I continue to inhale this aroma, it carries over into my breathing. And my breathing starts to slow, and my inner mind begins to calm. And eventually, I'm not going to need the image of smelling the flower. I'm simply going to be able to inhale, exhale with pleasure, do that several times. And the effect is that it focuses and calms the mind. Now, if I don't use this image right here, or this activity, I just keep my hands down in my lap, or I cross my arms over my chest like this, and continue to do that, it doesn't draw attention to itself. And right before the presentation, people just think, oh, she's collecting her thoughts. Isn't that nice? Or if you're on stage, waiting to go on stage, you can go, and you are ready to go. Because there's a chaotic event that's taking place inside the brain when you are almost ready to go on, even when you're ready to go on for your podcast. There are a little bit of jitters, a little bit of nerves.
Right.
And it is chaotic brain activity that's like a ping pong ball all over the brain. If you can quiet that so that you can focus on your job or the job at hand, then you're not going to have that chaotic activity. It's going to be channeled into a radiant form of focus that's going to give you energy, actually, and simultaneously calm you down. The second thing I do is I focus on the job, not the result. I do a lot of workshops where I'm the leader of the workshop. That workshop could be 1 hour, 5 hours, 8 hours, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. I'm always very, very nervous before I start because I know that when I start introducing the Leske training, it's so big, it's so comprehensive that I could get sidetracked constantly by a tangent. And if you go down a tangent in this work, you can't find your way back in 15 minutes. Right. It just goes exponentially in a different direction. So my fear always is that I'm going to lose my train of thought and I'm going to get sidetracked or go down a tangent, down the yellow brick road and never be able to come back. So I don't focus on the results anymore. I used to. Like, what's the reaction going to be? Well, guess what? You cannot control the reaction. It's like an audition. You give an audition. You're an actor, and you're prepping for an audition. You've got a big audition coming up, and you really want to do a good job. If you focus on the result or the reaction that the auditioner has to you, chances are you're going to get, your mind is going to go in a million directions and you're really going to maybe forget the text. Far better to let that go and not worry about what that person thinks of me. Just focus on the monologue or focus on the presentation. Focus on sharing the information because you're excited about the information. You know your material. Just have that prepared, know what you're going to say, but let go of the result or the reaction because you can't control. The only thing you can control is what you're doing right now. Would you agree?
I agree, and in fact, I noticed in my career as I was delivering whether some kind of speech or presentation, it is watching closely the reaction of the audience is something that can trip you up because you are focusing on the results like, oh, am I landing this? And then if someone, and you might be misinterpreting what people are doing. Someone might have a frown on their face because they were thinking about something else. Oh my goodness, I have to come home and had to do something. It might be totally unrelated, but you may be reading into it and be like, oh my goodness, I suck. This is terrible. These people are like hating what I'm doing over here. And then that feedback just comes back and just multiplies, and then you get more stressed and then as you are stressed, you're stressing the audience, and then the audience reacts, and it's a vicious cycle that just takes you off the rails. And so
it's a disastrous.
Yeah, and so I absolutely agree with you. Just focusing on the play with the words. I remember like you had me practice once. I think it was Kennedy's speech, and it was like you were telling me how he was using pauses, how he was using the voice intonation to play with the words, to play with the delivery of the message. And I believe that if you do that, you can focus on the content that you're delivering more than on the results that you're looking for in the audience.
Yep. I agree. Another thing to do is to stay in the moment. I think too often we're either reevaluating what we just said and like, oh, that didn't work. So we're in the past, or we're thinking about the future. Well, okay, I know what I'm going to do in about 5 minutes. I'm leading up to that 5 minutes. Better to stay in the moment because then you can really respond to what's taking place in the moment. And you're going to be much more effective if you stay in the moment. And that's true for you as a podcaster. It's got to be really difficult for you to be listening to me, but also thinking, okay, my next question is going to be this. And maybe, if I were doing a podcast, I would have a list of questions that I know that I'd like to ask. But I also want to be listening to the person's responses, because there might be something in that response that would trigger a better question right now. Right?
You're absolutely correct. And that's key. Those initial sort of questions that you have in mind that are sort of like forming the foundation of where you want to go are just supposed to give you, I'd say, like a safety net. Just so you are not stressed out that we're not going to have anything to talk about. Mm-hmm. But being an attentive listener, being someone who is literally like focusing on the words that your guest is saying and focusing on them, not just nodding and eyes glazed over and, okay, let me get to my next question. That's what I think, that's where those magic moments happen, I think, because I've experienced that on numerous occasions where the topic is just so interesting, and sometimes the problem that I find is that I have so many following questions based on what my guest said that I'm just hoping that I can remember all of them, but they literally grew out of the conversation, and then the conversation flows based on that.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you totally. I don't think you'll ever be wanting for a question if you're listening. Yeah.
That's true. Let's practice a pregnant pause right now.
Well, the reason why I was is because I was watching your face and you were still talking, but I didn't hear anything.
I know. It's
I can't interrupt you right now because he's still talking, but I don't hear anything.
It's an art form in itself, Nancy, to do these conversations remotely, because there's always a slight delay, and you don't want to be talking over somebody else, and so it's always funny how sometimes that just happens anyways, but it's okay.
That's the first time that happened, though. Actually, first time. Yeah. That's why I was kind of waiting. I went, "Oops, I think I better be quiet just for a minute, see what happens." He'll edit it out.
No, he won't. It's going to be the way it is. What else do you do in terms of memorizing what you want to deliver? And there are various methods, and there's some that I can share, but I'm curious, how are you, aside from preparation of the opening, right? So you rehearse the opening, so you have that memorized paragraph where you deliver, and then you kind of go from there. And obviously knowing that the subject and being knowledgeable about that. But you want to hit certain, key points, and you don't want to have, it looks best when you don't have a piece of paper that you always, refer to. It's always maybe good to have one just as that safety net. But what do you do when preparing, whether it's acting or delivering a speech or delivering a presentation? How do you memorize those milestones, those key points that you want to hit in your delivery?
Mm-hmm. Well, it depends on what we're talking about. If we're talking about acting, you have to know the script, period. You have to know it verbatim. You have to know you have to be able to respond in the moment. So there's no room for extemporaneous sort of byplay. Right. It either is or it isn't. So that's a whole separate kind of skill set. Learning lines as an actor is a laborious process. We in the Leske world have a much more playful way of learning lines, which I don't know if I can share with anyone right now, but let me just move then to the presentation itself. I just did an Oh my goodness. I don't usually do that. I think I'm thinking ahead. But when
I primed your brain.
when I'm teaching a workshop, what I do, I always request a whiteboard. We used to have blackboards, in the good old days, but right now we have this sort of rolling whiteboard. I would say I want a whiteboard, and I put my cogent points on the whiteboard, just my bullet points, what I'm going to be covering. And I do that for two reasons. One is for the group, and it's usually between 15 and 18 people, usually, right. Or it might be a slightly smaller group, but they don't want to listen to me the whole time, and I don't want them to. I want it to be experiential. But let's say I do need to share some information as by way of background. I have all that information on the whiteboard that I can refer to, just like a PowerPoint, right? It's going to be very similar to a PowerPoint, except it's not going to be interactive. It's going to be stationary. And that gives me my little bullet points that I want to cover to make sure that I cover everything that I want to cover in the time that's given to me. So that's what I do. I don't like to work looking at a piece of paper in front of me or my notes in front of me. If I have to, I will. I'll do it artfully. I'll do it. And let me just look at this just for a moment. Yes. And then we move on. But luckily, as a Leske master teacher, I've been teaching this work since 1980. So that's a couple of years. And I know the material. So I know where to start and when to finish. And I'm very good at time management. At least I'd like to think I am good at time management, that I will be able to only allot so much information to this segment and then move on, keep moving on. So my whiteboard is essential for me. Or if I don't have one of those, and I ask for a flip chart, and I do it on a flip chart so that I just have a visual for myself, because I'm a very visual person. If I can see the note, then I can remember the million paragraphs that go along with that one little bullet point. That's what I do.
I was curious if you have any memorization techniques. Some people use certain techniques to memorize key words, and that trigger the memory of what they want to talk about. And that's kind of like one way of memorizing key elements that will trigger your memory so you can get back on track with what you want to deliver.
Well, I hate to tell you, I don't have any tricks for that. The brain is a funny thing. Some people just learn by rote, one line after another. Some people learn by collecting or putting together thoughts that are all related to that subject, and then flow from one, point to the next point, kind of thing. Again, I think I approach this very much like my acting, which is I think of it as a script that is a bit open-ended, but nevertheless has a series of points that I need to make. Because the kind of presentations that I do are very time restrictive. I'm only given an hour and a half, or I'm given 2 hours, I'm given a half an hour, or I'm given 15 minutes, whatever it is. Unlike acting, which is act 1, act 2, act 3, you're sort of, you're stuck in that constraint. But when you're doing presentations, it's really dependent upon how long you're given, really.
Right.
But I don't have, like, for instance, I learned this line, like, once upon a time there was a little girl, to know that that's the beginning of my presentation. Right. I used to do that. I used to actually do that, try to memorize what I wanted to say. But the more I taught and the more I coached and the more I led workshops, the more I realized that I don't want it to sound scripted. I want it to be scripted, but I don't want it to sound scripted.
Right.
I hope that makes sense.
No, it does. It does. It's always that fine line between delivering something that just so polished that people just see it's a prepared presentation, and having that element of extemporaneous speech or element of it, which looks just so much more natural, because like, wow, that person is really thinking on their toes, and they are just like, and people like that, because like, wow.
Yeah. They like that, yeah. I think you should, find what works for you as far as the way you stand, the way you hold yourself. And the more you do this, it's like doing a podcast. You shared with me at the beginning that this is something that you're developing, and you get better at it with time. The more you do it, the better you get, the more you like it, the better you get, and it just keeps perpetuating itself. It's only when somebody else is observant of, say, for instance, your podcast and watches it for any length of time, who says, who's a podcast coach, right? Let's say there are people out there that coach podcasts. Well, that person would listen to you and go, the only thing I think I would add to Adrian's presentation is this. Let me share that with him, right? And then you could pick that tip up and run with it and experiment with it and see if it works for you.
Right.
I think that's how we all got better at what we're doing, by doing and by listening to other people's feedback.
Yeah.
And taking them seriously.
I agree with you. And I always ask my friends who are listening to some of these and others that I basically just revere in some respect in terms of like how they deliver things. And I ask them, hey, give me some feedback. Constructive criticism. This is a craft. I'm not a journalist by trade. And this is a craft that we hone over time. And it's important to get that constructive feedback and delivered in a right way, so it doesn't crush you as well. Because it's easy to kind of open yourself up too wide, and people will be just trolling you and really taking everything apart to such a degree that you're going to be like, oh my gosh, I should just not get out of bed. I suck. And and I think so. There's like a fine line, a balance in there as well. So I am more cognizant of. At least I'm trying to be more cognizant about the verbal pauses, those commas, those ums and ahs and things like that. But I need a methodology that I can follow, so it becomes a habit for me, so that I do it naturally and I don't have to even remind myself. So now I tend to put some cues around the studio to remind me not to do things. And I'm extra careful when I speak with you, as I recall some of the lessons that you grilled me through, to feel how I enunciate things and feel those letters and words coming out and connect with that sensation. And that's where Leske Method is different than other vocal coaching. What if you would step back in time and think about, why did you choose that method over other methods? Was that the first one that you've learned, or was it just something that you were like, you know what, I've tried this, I like this one better? Was it just a natural thing, or was it you consciously said like, no, I'm going to go with this because for whatever reasons? What made you choose that?
That is a great question, Adrian. That is what we call the leading question. That's beautiful. I never had any vocal training other than singing when I was a teenager, in high school as well as college. My theater department at UMBC, which is the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, my undergraduate was done there in theater, and they didn't have any voice training at all for actors. This was way back in 1968 to 72, and in those days, literally throughout the entire United States and possibly the world, vocal training for actors was in its infancy. There were no sort of pedagogies that were out there other than Arthur Leske, who was training people in New York, and I didn't have any access to anyone like that. So when I went to graduate school in 1972-73, I became introduced to the Leske training, the Leske kinesthetic training. It wasn't called that back then. It was just called Leske Voice and Body Training, based on his name. And I fell in love with it because it was something that was easy to do. It was something that I could feel. I could feel the changes taking place. It helped my voice tremendously. It built me a brand new voice, brand new speaking voice. And it also traveled over into my singing voice and helped my singing voice as well. So when I came back here to the Baltimore area, I was at the Dallas Theater Center for my graduate training in acting. And when I came back to the East Coast, I just started using it as an actor. I never thought I would ever teach voice. I never did. Until 1980, when Donald Hicken, the head of the theater department at Baltimore School for the Arts, which had just opened up its doors to a student populace, he asked me if I would teach voice. I said, well, Donald, I don't know how to teach voice. He said, well, just no, because you have a really good voice, and I think our students could benefit from your professional knowledge. And so I started developing my own teaching methodology based on what I knew from the Leske training. And it was years before I recognized that there were probably other pedagogies out there, but this one seemed so comprehensive. There was so much to it. There was consonant work, there was vowel work, there was resonance work, there was breathing work, there was body work. There was so much to it. It is the most comprehensive voice and body training that exists in the world. It is acknowledged that way. So when I started investigating some other pedagogies, I recognized that they had a lot to offer. I mean, I would never denigrate or put down any vocal pedagogy anywhere. They all have tremendous value. But I have found for myself that the Leske training touches bases everywhere. It covers every aspect of voice training that is necessary to address. And it also trains the body at the same time. And by doing both, unlocks the imagination. So you have all three aspects of actor training embodied in one pedagogy. That is why I've never felt the need to go outside the Leske training, because I think it addresses all the aspects of voice training that addressing. I've been very happy with it, been very successful with it.
I like how it connects the body, that feeling, because those are the things that a lot of people connect with. It's like muscle memory, but with your mouth.
Yes.
and your throat and your breathing apparatus. So it's something that it's not as abstract, where you will just have someone practice something to death and they will just do it by rote, just like learning by rote, versus they have something to connect to with that feeling, and that's kind of like how I understood that methodology, and I think it's very helpful, especially if you can remember that.
I go back to something you said before. You said that you were building new habits for yourself by putting maybe pieces of paper here and there, or maybe little hints here and there. Actually, the Leske training doesn't give you a new habit. It gives you habitual awareness, which means an ongoing monitoring system that's taking place within you. That's literally what's taking place for you. It's not that you're supplanting one habit with another, because a habit, by its very nature, is done without awareness. And the major hallmark of the Leske work is it builds constant awareness in the moment of what is taking place. This work looks good, feels good, sounds good, moves forward, and communicates. Those are the 5 hallmarks of the Leske training. I always try to remind people of that. Remember, there are 5 aspects of this, not just 4. Let's make sure we're communicating. Let's make sure we're moving it forward, meaning on the hard palate, as well as the thought moving forward. Let's make sure we're not imitating. Let's not make sure this isn't ear training. Let's make sure we're feeling it. As you said, muscle memory. It really is building a physical muscle memory of what's taking place, which is why it's so powerful, because it's solely reliant on you. I always tell my teenage students, this work is perfect for you, because teenagers are notoriously self-absorbed. So this is all about you. It's not about anybody else. It's not about the guy sitting next to you. It's about what's taking place inside of you. That's why it has innate power.
What are some of the things that people, vocal aspects that people come to you with the need of improving or changing? You've coached so many people that certainly some trends may have emerged. So what are some of the things that people come to you in a need of helping with from a professional coach like you?
As many people as there are in the world, that's as many different aspects of improvement they've been looking for. I've had people come to me wanting accent modification, meaning they come with an accent in place, which is from their first language, their home language, their language of the heart, as one of our master teachers, Martha Monroe from South Africa, is always saying. So they want to be understood better. They just want American people that they talk to and interact with to be able to understand them better. So I help them to not lose their accent, because I don't feel that that's something that's necessary. What you bring to the table is what you have. And if that accent is part of who you are right now, let's leave that alone, but let's add things to it that make it much more clear for people to understand you. Or if you're not being, some people come to me not being heard, so I help them build a stronger voice. They feel like they have too quiet a voice, or their voice is retreating, and so that's not very effective. So I help them gain that more strong resonance, the more presence in the voice. Some people are not very expressive, or they feel like they're monotone. So I help them find more musicality in their voices. Some people are coming to me looking for voiceover training, which is a whole different kettle of fish. I mean, that involves a whole different skill set of being a voice actor. That's what voiceover work really is. It's becoming an actor who primarily uses his or her voice in order to communicate and to build character. So I help them with that. Some people want monologue coaching. Like every September, there's always a crop of teenagers whose parents want them to gain access to someone who can help them build a repertoire of monologues for auditions for colleges or college students that are going to graduate school, or young people in high school that need an audition piece for, a movie they're auditioning for. So I can help them with that. I mean, look at all these different things. It's kind of amazing. I mean, and again, like you, I learned on the job. I accepted anybody into my studio if I thought what I could do for them would help them. And we always have a little contract. I mean, we have our initial meeting where we decide together whether this is going to be workable for them, if this is something they're going to enjoy doing. I always give them that option that, well, let's do one and see how it works. And if you like what you're experiencing, we'll move forward. And by and large, that seems to be successful.
As a performer, a singer, a musician, how much of your musical and singing training have influenced how you teach vocal skills?
Well, to be honest with you, the LESAC work is all based on music. Matter of fact, one of the things we always ask potential students who want to come to a workshop is, do you sing? And, many people say yes. Some people say no.
In the shower.
Yeah, right. Do you do air guitar in the shower? And as long as you enjoy it, that's all that matters. Not whether you're good at it, just whether you enjoy it. Do you like to dance? Right? Do you play an instrument? Are you athletic? These are the kinds of questions we ask potential candidates that want to apply to our workshops. Not because we're looking for people that have exceptional skills, but because the LESAC training, by its very nature, is based on music. The music of the consonants, the music of the voice, the music of the vowels. So it does have a strong musical component. So I found immediately, as soon as I was introduced to this work, how this was going to help my singing voice. So singing, matter of fact, sometimes I even ask people, would you sing that sentence? But by singing, I mean, just attach a note to it. It doesn't have to be that pretty. Just like if the line is Joe Roberts, powerful chauffeur, I say, just sing it. Joe Roberts, powerful chauffeur. And now speak it with the feeling of singing. Joe Roberts, powerful chauffeur. So what was a note now becomes inflection. Right. And it keeps the continuation of vibration moving forward. So I have found that my musical background has really helped me to be a better teacher of this work, because I can find the correlation easier and quicker between the speaking voice and the singing voice, because they are one and the same. Just the dynamics are somewhat different. So it has been a happy accident that I'm also a musician and a singer, because I can help people that come to me as singers speak more like they sing, because singers have far better skills at singing, usually those that are trained. But as soon as they start to speak, they forget all of what they know about singing when they start speaking. So I help them to make the crossover, make that carryover of their singing voice seem like, oh, now my speaking voice has a lot of the same skills, a lot of the same feelings, sensations that my singing voice has, which is wonderful. That's what we want, one seamless instrument.
And how do you help them remember that? Because they might treat singing as a separate activity than speaking. Is it just by making it aware, make them aware of it? How do they remember that, hey, I can employ some of these things that I do with singing in my voice work?
That all comes with the doing. To introduce somebody to that concept, it's not like, here, take these 2 voice pills, call me in the morning.
Right.
That doesn't happen. No. But what does happen is if they get introduced to the concept of let's sing this line, and then let's carry the feeling of singing into the speaking of that line, but let's not forget what that feels like, pretty soon they're going to start to make that connection. It doesn't take long. The brain is amazing. Arthur Leske, the man that wrote the book from which I teach, used to contend that, I just lost my train of thought. Isn't that terrible? What did he used to contend? I mean, oh no, gone. Oh no, that's terrible. I'm sorry, Adrian. It's
no, it's
gone. Oh, I had a senior moment. Oh no.
The connection between singing and vocal work, both of those, if you connect to the feeling, which is what part of the Leske Method, the sensation when you're singing, it's even elevated, because when we're singing, everything that comes out of people's mouths, the vibration is that much more powerful. So hopefully maybe that connection with, again, the feeling of how things sound when they come out of your mouth, you can kind of remember that when you're speaking as well. I literally remember when we were going through some exercises, and especially like and all that, and you were coaching me how to feel things. And so sometimes, literally, when I talk to my daughter and when she speaks, and I hear the way she says things, and then I say something, and I'm like, ooh, that feeling reminded me of your training, because of that vibration, because of that resonance that I felt. And it's funny how brain works. So you're absolutely right. The brain has that capability of quickly connecting those things.
I remember what I was going to say. He used to contend that this work is actually whole brain learning. What that means is, we have a hemisphere. We have two hemispheres, and there is a membrane that connects both hemispheres of the brain. It's called the corpus callosum,
right?
And which means a large body. But it is porous. It is a membrane that allows the synapses to cross over. So essentially, when you are starting to hum on that V, as you said, you are creating a new synapse that connects the left side of your brain, which is taking in the information, and it crosses over the corpus callosum into the right brain, which unlocks memories, images, and emotions. And so you're actually making a deeper connection between those two, which creates a new synapse, new information, new overtones. So that is why music, is such an amazing way to teach children anything, through music, through vibration, because I can't speak enough about it. It's just simply amazing that this work unlocks so many deeply held emotions. Sometimes people have reactions and responses to what we're doing in the studio, and they love it. They love it. That's why they say, this work really feels good. Why does it feel so good? Well, the vibrations themselves give you an inner massage. When you're humming on like that, you can feel it inside your head, activating the bones of your face and your head. And it actually feels good.
It does.
It feels good, especially children. If you were to, that's why maybe your little girl, if you read to her at night before, she goes to sleep, and you rest her right here on your chest, and you're talking, you're reading the book's in front of her, and your arms are sort of around her like this. She's getting the reaction from the vibration of your voice through your chest into her body, and it's a wonderful experience for children.
That is so funny that you mentioned that, because I was reading a book to her last night, and she literally just lay her head on my chest, and it was like my voice was bouncing off of her and coming back to me. So I felt my voice, and I knew that she was feeling it. So I definitely literally resonate with that.
Right. Resonate on many levels. Yes. Right. It's very comforting to children to feel that vibration. I have a very short story to tell you about one of our master teachers, Crystal Robbins, who, when she gave birth to her first baby, she has two, what we call Leske babies. Both of these children were born to a Leske teacher. And Arthur Leske was like her birth coach, because she was his assistant, like his administrative assistant. And he taught her to Y-buzz into the baby when the baby is resting in her arms like this, Y-buzz into the baby's head, into the skull, because the skull is still soft at the juncture points at the top of the head, right here, when the baby is born. And it would calm down little Maeve. Her name was Maeve. And Maeve is now 19 years old, okay, 19 or 20. So Maeve is all grown up now. But when Maeve was a little girl, she would come to her mother and say, "Buzz me, mommy, buzz me," because she was upset. And Crystal would take her in her arms and just like this, what we call the Y buzz, which is the sound of the Y-E-E, into her head. And it just calmed her completely down. So I share that with all of your friends at home, that really, if you want to calm your child down, teach yourself how to hum into the young baby's head, and it'll calm her down or calm him down. It's an amazing strategy.
Amazing. What do you see in terms of speech and training and vocal training that has evolved as you were teaching this over the years, and some of the predictions that you may have for the future in terms of what else can be done to help people with proper speech, with enunciation, with pronunciation, with delivery? Do you see that what Arthur Lesak came up with is so complete and so, I guess complete is the word, that there's no need for any additional evolution, or has it already evolved?
Oh, that's a great question. Actually, Arthur wrote his book, The Use and Training of the Human Voice, back in the 1960s, the early 60s. And he said, the only reason I'm writing this book is so that I can remember what it is that I would like to teach, and that other people can read it for themselves and do it for themselves. But his mind always was evolving this work. He, even on his deathbed, he was still trying to Y-buzz himself back to life. He recognized that the terms that he was using back in the 1960s and the 70s and the 80s would someday no longer suffice. We would need different terms we could relate to now, different images that perhaps we would have to relate to in a different way, because humanity evolves, language evolves. And ever since I first started, which I was certified in 1995 in this work and became a master teacher in 2002, I've seen the work continuously evolve, and it needs to evolve. Not that the principles will change. The principles will always remain the same, but the terminology that we use, even some of the ways that we teach it. Matter of fact, Sue Ann Park, who was our senior master teacher and our original director of training, was Arthur's right-hand woman for like 40 years. He found her at the Goodman School, which was in Chicago, years in the 1960s, and kind of cultivated her as a teacher of his work, to the point where eventually she became his first master teacher. And when Sue Ann, who was Arthur's contemporary, she was in her 80s when he was in his 90s, and they would still be teaching. And then we were brought on board, the younger generation, myself and Barry Kerr and Deb Kinghorn, and then eventually Crystal Robbins and March Monroe. These are the master teachers that are still teaching today. When we were brought into the fold and we started teaching, Sue Ann would watch us teach, and she paid us the highest compliment. She said, "We teach the work," meaning she and Arthur. "You share the work." And there's an evolutionary change right there. The fact that no longer was it probably the best method of teaching would be that sort of method of I talk, you listen, I talk, you listen, I talk, you listen, write down, you write down, you write down. That's one way of learning. But it's far better to experience, and it's far better to think of yourself as a colleague in the work, a fellow journeyer in the work, rather than I'm the master teacher and you better darn sight listen to me.
Right.
Because I know more than you do. And that, she said, when you share the work, you put yourself almost on the same level playing field as those that are learning from you, and it makes it a more collegial experience. That is a huge evolutionary change. So aside from terms having changed, maybe the way of teaching has changed. The principles will never change. We need to adhere to the principles because There's nothing wrong and nothing needs to be changed about the principles of the work. But we continually see it growing exponentially. Matter of fact, this work started in the States. Arthur's dream always was for it to be global. He always wanted a global communication throughout the world, that this work has resonance, has efficacy in any language. Any language, any voice can be improved, strengthened, and enhanced by this work. Now we have centers all over the world. Matter of fact, I've taught in South Africa, in Pretoria. I've taught in Sydney, Australia. My hope is to one day go to Croatia, where we have a very strong center, maybe even Singapore, where we have an outreach there as well. And we're in South America. We're in Canada. We're everywhere now. And I think that is so exciting. And I know that Arthur is looking down from his exalted place and thinking to himself, wow, my work really has traveled throughout the world. Isn't that wonderful?
It is, and I'm so happy that you said that principles didn't need to be modified, because if they are really true to the core and don't need to evolve, then principles are great. They are the staples. They are those pillars that hold the structure, and then everything else is ornaments and things that can change, and those are the things that obviously have to evolve. And I'm glad to hear that you guys are changing also, like the way things are delivered, and because it's just responsive to how times are changing and how people are learning as well.
Exactly. The learning modalities are so different now. Arthur's work, like many of the great disciplines in the world, is based on universal truths. And that's what the principles are based on, universal truths. So if it's a universal truth, it doesn't have to be changed. Matter of fact, it shouldn't be changed.
Right.
So like many pedagogies throughout the world that teach holistically, based on universal truth, that's why this work, I think, has grown as exponentially as it has, especially in the last 20 years. It's really grown beyond the shores of the United States.
I'm really curious about what can parents do of kids of various ages to, I guess, plant those early seeds for the kids to have those good habits in their speech. You know how we are so stuck with our devices. We constantly have faces in our phones, and it's happening. So people are communicating less and less verbally. It's getting to the point where people in the same household are texting each other in one room apart. And so I fear like this skill. I mean, you guys, we're going to have more and more work, not less. But for the parents that want to engage and want to have their kids, given the right tools so they can build their skills, what would you tell them? What was some of the tips that you would give them to engage, to train, to what can they do on their own?
These are such simple answers to a very complex question. I mean, I know it's going to seem very brain dead easy, what I'm saying here, but it does require time and devotion to the language. What I think, I'm just going to do a little sidebar here before I move into what I think might help. And that is the saddest thing I think I've seen in recent years is two people on a date. They're sitting across the table from each other, and I could tell they're like newly dating. They're looking at their phones instead of looking at each other.
Right.
That to me is tragic. It's one thing to be married for 15 years and not have anything more to say to each other. That's tragic too in a different way. But it's another thing to be newly excited about one another and not have anything. I saw literally yesterday at breakfast, two people holding hands, a man and a woman holding hands across a table, very small table, and they both were on their phone, texting or doing something while they held hands with the other hand. I went, what is wrong with this picture? Okay. All right. So that's the sidebar. What families can do, what parents can do. I think, and I realize that this seems very archaic, but we need to start talking to each other. A husband and wife talking to each other, spouses talking to each other, including the child in the conversation, reading to your child every night as a ritual. I think children love rituals. And one of the rituals, or a few of the rituals that I think I grew up with that I cherish deeply, and I think making memories with your children is very, very important. It's going to stand them in very good stead as they get older, is to establish very early on what the rituals are going to be. Are we going to turn off our phones and have a half an hour of just conversation, even if it's inane conversation? What did you do today? I don't know. What did you do today? What did you learn at school today? What's the Jeopardy question? What can we answer the Jeopardy question? Things like that can start conversations happening and give time for everyone to actually answer a question or to bring up a subject. It might be awkward at first to do this, but if we set aside time, even if it's a half an hour, even if it's 15 minutes to get started, because sometimes a half an hour might be just a little too painful initially to try to do this. But 15 minutes of just active conversation, listening, builds communication skills like you wouldn't believe. Also listening skills that are desperately needed. And putting those devices down and putting them away for that amount of time is going to be treasured by your family. Second thing I would really advise is for parents to read, like you're doing with your little girl. Read to their children. If that's a ritual you would like to establish at night, that would be great, because nighttime is a bonding time. I mean, the days are so busy nowadays. I mean, I actually feel sorry for children that are just shunted from one event to the next. We've got ballet, we've got soccer, we've got this, we've got that. We're learning a new language. There's no time for kids simply to be, alone or play with other children outside, God forbid. So, if we want to establish a ritual, morning could be talking to one another, put the phone away. Then somewhere in the evening, either another time of talking, or maybe a recap of the day, followed by let's go to bed now, let's put out the lights, or let's go for reading time, and give every child a chance in his or her room to read from a book, an actual book, not a tablet, a book. So you can turn the page. And then for the little ones to do as you did, have her, find your little cozy spot, in the room, or if it's in her bed or it's, in a chair, whatever, and begin that ritual of reading aloud, because the voice is such a powerful thing. To allow them to have that precious time with you to close down the day. It really changes the brain waves of every child to turn off the devices at least a half an hour before retiring, so that all of that activity can come to closure and either read or have quiet time with music on, something like that. I think the more we can bond with our children and with other family members, the more healthy we're going to be ultimately.
I agree. One thing that, as you were mentioning the reading of a physical book, it just reminded me when I was reading to my daughter the story. I actually played with the words, and I'm not sure if I did that because of the training that I had with you, but I started actually literally practicing clearer enunciation and starting playing with those, maybe even overdoing it a little bit so that it resonated even further for her to kind of get that across and see how fun it can be. So maybe combining reading to your kids so that you instill those things early on, along with the practice for you. Maybe the answer of sort of gamifying this activity so that both a parent or caregiver and a child can get something out of it. You reading the books out loud and practicing at the same time. No more excuses that I don't have enough time to practice, because you can just read a book to your child or to someone that you're babysitting. So that's a good idea.
I totally agree with you, because that's one of the things that I recommend to my clients in my studio, if I know they have young children, is to let's rehearse, let's experiment and explore playing different characters in the book. How can you be the wolf, for instance, or what can you do vocally that's going to enhance that character? Because the child loves your voice more than anything in the world. Whether it's a good voice, a bad voice, or an indifferent voice, it's your voice, and that's the voice they love. So the more you can share that voice with them, the better, and you can rehearse your skill building at the same time.
Right. Well, Nancy, I could talk to you for hours and hours. I know you are on East Coast, so it's getting late over there. So I wanted to thank you so much for being on the show, and I wanted to I guess use this platform for you to share where people can learn more about the Leske Method, and how can they engage with some of the teachers across the country or maybe even the world. How can they find out more with whom they can locally connect to get some training or explore this?
Terrific question. And I can give you the short answer, which is we have a wonderful website at www.lessacinstitute.org, LESSAC Institute.org. And they can just go to the homepage and you can find a trainer by region. You can find out more about the training right there on the homepage, or many of the buttons will take you to wherever you're interested in. Like if you want a workshop, if you want to know more about the history, about Arthur Lesak himself. It's all addressed and all answered right there on that website. And they can actually find me on that website under, find a trainer and the Mid-Atlantic region. And you just click on Mid-Atlantic and my name comes right up there and my address, and we can be off and running before you know it. That's where I would go first.
And here's Nancy's website. Actually, no, that's just here's how you spell Lesak. Lesak Master Teacher was in your subtitle, so that's how people can also get the spelling for those who are visual. And and on your website, nancykrebs.com, they can find more about what you do, not only in your vocal training. I know I kind of partially heavy-handed you into the conversation about vocal training, but you also you do also other things, and you work on other projects. And for those of you who are in Maryland, you guys can reach out to Nancy, and if you have any need for vocal training or other things that she offers, you can learn about that on Nancy's website. Nancy, thank you so much again. I really appreciate the time. And I'm looking forward to speaking to you sometime in the future again and see what's new in your world. And thank you for doing what you're doing. That certainly has helped me in confidence in communicating. The only thing that I have to work on is remembering everything that you taught. But I do have good notes, so I'm going to have to revisit this. And thank you for giving me new ideas to what to do with respect to instilling some of these skills into my daughter, and we're going to leave it with that.
Great. Well, thank you, Adrian, for inviting me to participate. It's been a lot of fun, and you're a wonderful interviewer.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. That means a lot to me. I think I just enjoy this, and that's why it doesn't feel as rehearsed to me, or it doesn't feel forced. I really enjoy talking to interesting people such as yourself. And
thank you.
I'm gonna leave you with the homework of introducing me to the following guests, and we're gonna do that offline. If you can email me someone who you'll find interesting and who you think would be interested in doing a podcast and talking about interesting topics that bring value to other people who are listening to these podcasts, I would be thrilled and grateful.
Okay, I'll do that. I'll put my thinking cap on.
And with that, we're going to wrap up. Ladies and gentlemen, Nancy Krebs. You can find her at nancykrebs.com. She is a multi-talented person who can help you with a lot of different things, but definitely vocal training is one of them. And until next time, I'm Adrian Sinclair, and thank you for listening to this show. The world is full of interesting people with wisdom and extraordinary experiences to learn from. Join me on a journey to discover them, speak with them, and learn from them. I'm Adrian Sinclair, host of A Podcast with Interesting People at apodcast.com.